All right. So we'll just get going. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone again. And welcome again, Muji. Hypergrowth. I want to make sure I get that hypergrowth correct. As Muji mentioned, I'm currently working on an article right now. I hope it will be published sometime over the next couple of weeks. And on this article, my goal is really just to differentiate between Cloudflare and Fastly. And right now, I'm currently going through a couple of expert call reports, analyst reports on those, and I was like, hey, why not contact Muji? Muji is one of the experts, and for most of you who don't know, Muji's actually been covering a lot of this edge networks and CDN platforms even prior to the pandemic. And so I was like, hey, I need to talk to you about this. And so instead of talking about the conversations in DMs, I was like, hey, how about we bring it to spaces? Hopefully, lots of people do benefit from our conversation. So for everyone who doesn't know Muji, he's been an investor for over 20 years, and he's a technology data architect. And personally, my own background just primarily comes from business analysis and product management within data analytics and machine learning projects, primarily on the cloud, primarily on core cloud, but I'm not familiar as much with edge networks, and so that's where Moji would help complement my background. And so, just what's the objective for this space? I want to just take a minute or two here to just clarify what we're really trying to achieve during the spaces, because I know this would be recorded for a number of people. So, the goal really is just to identify what are the core fundamental differences between Fastly and Cloudflare. Are there too much of a difference, or there's quite a lot of similarities? We know that for sure. But what are some of those core differences that investors could use to actually differentiate them? I guess I'm really hoping our conversation today, we're going to use a frameworks oriented. I love using frameworks for evaluating companies, and I hope that'll be helpful. And so primarily we're going to talk about Muji's framework. We're also going to talk about the core differences from a technology and IP strategy approach. So that'll be a part of our conversation today. The other part would be around the go-to-market strategy. I think actually that might be where there might be a couple of core differences. Talk about a couple of things about the culture within both companies, and then how do we see CDNs evolving, from just a commoditized industry that everyone knows today into more of the edge networks where we see them go in the future. So my goal really is at the end of this conversation, everyone has evidence. We're not doing recommendations on here, but we're going to use data and evidence to back up differences between both companies. And so I hope everyone gets something out of this. If you guys don't know, if you guys need an intro, we're not going to do introductions into both companies. That's not the goal of this conversation. So if you guys need that, I highly recommend going to Muji's um, blog. He has a very deep dive on edge networks, and he does go through some of those fundamental differences. So, highly recommend going over this just in case you have trouble with some technical words that we're going to talk about over this. So without going further, Muji, thanks again for this. And so let's begin with kind of a big picture. Let's start big picture. What framework do you generally use to evaluate both companies, or even maybe the CDN slash edge network industries from a high level?
So I actually kind of spoke on my uh, investment thesis overall with hypergrowth companies at an event called the FinTwit Summit. It was kind of around investor education back in March now, a couple months ago. But I am actually about to publish a post on that on my blog, which is hypergrowth.com, three H's at the start. Um, kind of detailing that a little more, and it really does cover what my approach is with these companies, which is, first and foremost, identifying kind of secular trends in technology that I think are going to gain a lot of traction. And edge networks is but one. Data and analytics is going to be enormous from here. Cybersecurity, is kind of going through a shift in how it's structured with cloud native services. Um, Developer tooling has been a big one. Kind of riding that wave of the app economy, the API economy. So those are kind of the industries I've covered. But in particular, I'm looking for companies that are growing uh, at hyper growth speed. So I look at the top line and am, am trying to find companies that are growing rapidly. But I also like to see evidence that that the operations of the company are solid and supporting that growth. That it's not just growth for growth's sake. That this ultimately needs to be profitable growth. So I'm looking for things like land and expand. Um, you know, I do look at the go to market of these companies, how the operations are top down or bottom up. Um, how they're structuring their business and their platform, and then I go in with kind of my technical expertise of looking at the platform to try and put the puzzle pieces together of these companies in order to that we have from the picture of their product releases and what industry they're in, any information they've given about the underlying architecture of what they're building, and then their finances and earnings and the public view we as investors get into companies. Try to put all those puzzle pieces together to figure out where these companies are going next. And so, once I identified edge networks, uh, as you mentioned, over a year ago, got interested in them after Cloudflare's IPO and Fastly's. And last, I want to say August, I wrote the blog piece, "What are edge networks?" And as Francis mentioned, you can go back and
Do you want me to actually?
get that background.
I have that blog up. Do you want me to just pin that in the space so everyone can see that?
Yeah, please. Sure.
No problem.
Thanks, Wolf. You're the pro at this spaces stuff. I'm
It is
glad we have you
it
on
is my
board.
full-time job. So
Oh wow, that's excellent. Yeah, thanks for recording too. Um, so yeah, that piece really goes over the underlying the history of how it got to where it is today, which is all these companies providing an incredibly commoditized service of CDN, content delivery network, which is a distributed cache around the globe that's serving up web content that doesn't change often, whether that be videos or a product catalog in an e-commerce store or New York Times articles that are being published at a regular basis, but don't change often. Those could be distributed around the globe, and to the users that are making requests of that content can be hitting that cache and getting a much, much faster response for their web requests or app requests instead of traversing the globe to whatever data center is handling that traffic. So I go over all that history there, but as far as uh, I guess I saw the trends within what was going on in the CDN space, which was that companies were developing the architecture to do better things than CDN. And that combined with industry reports from Gartner and others that were talking about how this revolution of IoT and 5G was coming. This is kind of a bet on that as well, which is that there's going to be an explosion of bandwidth distributed around the globe from the ISP outward. And how that was going to change the flow of data across the internet, I think was key to understanding this trend, which is that the CDN and the internet at large is built around centralized information that's being distributed outward. So you're publishing a YouTube video that goes and gets stored on a server somewhere. Information is flowing outward from there. You've got millions of people who want to watch that video. It gets distributed to these edge servers that are serving up cached content. And so, let's say in Fastly's case, you're distributing that video out to 80 plus edge servers. That's delivering the millions of hits much closer to the user requesting it. And that takes the load off of your core service of where it's hosted. That's what I kind of call the publish and subscribe or publish and consume model of the internet. That's flipping. So Gartner predicted 75% of traffic on the internet is going to be flowing the other direction. It's going to be coming from devices, smart buildings, smart vehicles, smart factories, smart anything. But you got asset tracking, you've got distributed retail stores with point of sale systems, you've got a network of cameras out there. All that information is flowing inward into the internet. And so it's that flipping of the data flow that's key to understanding what the potential is with edge networks. And so, I kind of started identifying these things as far as edge networks, as far as the industry trends. But then once I've got that trend, I look for hyper growth within, and that's kind of where my investment thesis starts kicking in.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for that. Totally, and I believe, yes, a network located obviously in the periphery of a central network, right? And just the way Cloudflare, especially Cloudflare and Fastly, the way they actually build their edge networks on top of these CDN platforms across the globe or across different ISPs across the globe. I think that's truly what differentiates them from an Akamai or some of those legacy players. So let's maybe go on the first approach of our discussion today, which is the technology aspect of things. So the architectural technology piece between Cloudflare, the core difference. So from my research so far, it appears that both of these players are just, maybe this is because of how they built their networks, they do have a lot of similarities just in terms of the way they actually design their CDN platforms to make it capable for more edge compute and more edge network, which is why they're actually getting a lot more traction today than perhaps in Akamai. And that's why Akamai is still sluggish. They haven't fully gotten into, they're just not way ahead. They don't have the programmatic network of some of these platforms. And so maybe let's focus on the technology piece. So what is the fundamental difference between Fastly and Cloudflare, specifically just on the technology piece? And maybe you could maybe first of all talk about the similarities in the architecture, and then maybe some of those tiny differences like speed, security, and some of those pieces.
Yeah, sure. Yes, the similarities is the place to start. They have both built software-defined networked backbones across the globe. And so they control kind of massive amounts of bandwidth and are able to move data around, and I mean, away from the internet to where they want it to go. So the way to think of these edge networks is as private networks that have been built that span the globe. So they've got a better way to route traffic from Chicago to Atlanta because they have a backbone between those cities rather than going through the public internet routing. On top of that, they have put powerful servers. Well, let me take one step back. What that backbone of networking does is create a mesh around the globe. So, companies like Zscaler are doing this. Agora is building up its own edge networks. I consider those both kind of specialized, whereas Fastly and Cloudflare are putting up edge networks and making use of it themselves, certainly, but they're trying to develop a new developer platform on top of it. But they put these powerful servers and are distributed around the globe. Like, let's say in Fastly's case, that was built around CDNs. But they realized that they could build other things on top of all of that infrastructure that they dispersed and had all that capex for. So they had all the bandwidth, global network, a mesh of networking around the globe that could provide a kind of a private internet space. And then these edge servers serve as the entry points to that mesh. And that's where they were delivering, cached content in the CDN paradigm. But with edge servers, they're realizing that presents a point of compute that they can have other people running apps on. And so those entry points to the edge network mesh is typically about one hop away from ISPs. And so you can kind of immediately see the benefit of where they're going with this architecture is the same benefit for CDNs, is that you're reducing the latency that it takes for any device out there that's making a request of these applications. It's one hop away from their ISP or the cellular tower. They don't have to traverse the globe to whatever data center is hosting that content. It's all right there and immediate. So, very similar architectures overall. And in building this kind of edge compute platform on top of their edge network, again, at those entry points to the network, that's kind of where you start seeing differences of the approach they took with technologies. It's all under the hood based on a concept called the WebAssembly, which is, I guess the way to think about WebAssembly, it's binaries for the web. So you used to, I come from long ago, a Windows background, solely Mac now, but you have exe files that you install on your computer as applications that are a compiled binary of code, but that you just run it on the operating system. WebAssembly is that same concept for the web. It provides you the ability to wrap an application up into a binary and run it somewhere. So in the case of Cloudflare, they built their workers platform on Chrome V8, which is a browser-based technology to deliver WebAssembly or to be able to run WebAssembly code. And the approach that Fastly took was a level deeper, using the system version of WebAssembly that's directly running it on the Linux machines. So removing the browser engine part of the equation and going one layer down into the system. And so that's kind of the primary architecture difference. I know my fellow blogger Peter Ofringa from Software Stack Investing has really gone into that differences of architecture in his Fastly coverage, especially last year. If you want to get more into the technicals of what's going on in WebAssembly versus what's called WASI, which is the system interface for it, kind of one level down. But it's basically, one company decided to run the executables in a browser, the other decided to run them in the system level. And I think, unfortunately, the WASI part, the system level, wasn't quite where it needed to be. It was a very nascent technology. And so I think there's been some slight headaches with that architectural decision, but for the long term, it's a fantastic decision. It's ultimately going to support, running serverless in a lower level, and ultimately has to be a faster level because you're removing kind of the browser engine from the equation. And so, likely a fantastic long-term decision, but they had to really catch the technology up. And they had to, in their case, Fastly invented an open source software called Lucet, and has kind of merged with the Mozilla team that was really leading the charge on WASI. And the two open source packages are coming together at this point. And there's a new nonprofit called Bytecode Alliance that has been formed to kind of support this technology. But I think that's kind of maybe one of the differences why one company got their edge compute into production quickly, and the other has had to, basically take 2 years to develop Lucet, get it stable, then build the edge serverless platform on top of it. So
Fascinating.
architecture-wise, I think that's basically the difference. Otherwise, I think they're incredibly similar. Giant bandwidth, network of bandwidth that they built around the globe with edge servers that are called at what are called points of presence, which is again that gateway into and out of that global edge network mesh.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I love how you really honed in on just in terms of just the web assembly architectural differences on the web and just how Fastly goes maybe beyond the Chrome, beyond the web browser, and a lot of like Cloudflare Workers product does a lot of it kind of at the surface, if you want to think about it at the surface, browser level. So could we maybe, because now this is another popular conception about Fastly versus Cloudflare on FinTwit and everywhere is Fastly is a lot more faster, right? We know they're all about speed. They're all about optimizing the digital experience of live events, right? Your e-commerce platforms, right? We know this is some of the difference. And it's interesting you mentioned this web assembly architecture and just going deeper into the web browser. Is this what fundamentally leads to Fastly being more of a platform that's able to allow you that deeper speed that you need? And Cloudflare, yes, does have some speed, but that's not the emphasis. So, do you want to maybe talk about the technological differences and how both of them differentiated themselves on that level?
Yeah, I'd even take a slight sidebar first, and let's just talk about the structure of the companies and where they came from. So I'm in my piece, and just now we're lumping them together as CDN companies. They're absolutely both in that space and both provided that as a service. But just to talk about the difference between the two companies, Fastly got built as a speed-focused CDN network that was very developer friendly, which is two things Akamai, the gorilla of the industry, did not have, which was developer focused and speed. Like it was very like you'd even have to call up support in order to get your caches cleared to refresh the content if it changed. But it could take hours to change your content in CDNs. And so the entire premise Fastly got built around was speed of CDN and friendliness of the CDN, that you could go in as a developer and could code directly into the CDN and control its operation. And so immense developer focus, kind of driven by APIs that you could tap into in Fastly in order to promote new content, signal that content changed, control the operations of the CDN. Cloudflare, on the other hand, absolutely has CDN services, but they're a service that built up as a proxy for web applications. And so they are a service that sits between the users making requests and the application servers that get hit for that. And as part of that, they provide CDN services, but that's one of many services that they provide around their kind of three directions that they honed on in their core platform, which was security, performance, and reliability. And so performance being the key for CDN, their CDN service could help cache the content from the underlying servers that it was protecting and help deliver it so that it, again, reducing the time to for your content to get back to you. So, but it was one of many services. And so I think it's just kind of important to understand that fundamental difference of these two businesses and how they got kind of to the same architecture and same space for different reasons. But they both built, again, that software-defined networking to have basically a programmable network And then they were building services over that programmable network and into the edge servers that they were putting in, which were powerful machines that were capable of compute and speed.
Awesome.
So pivoting to that architectural decision of going with WASI over something like V8, the browser-based way to deliver WebAssembly. You can see why they made that decision, because they are such a speed-focused company. That's their entire differentiator, that and developer-friendly, from the main competition in the CDN space. But it sits firmly in that CDN space. It had some ancillary security products, but whereas Cloudflare was, I guess, a little more moving in a couple of different directions around that security, performance, and reliability, and performance just being the one that had to deal with CDN. So they kind of came about this separately. They ended up with very similar architectures, and edge compute. I'd say Cloudflare isn't trying to be a competitor in the CDN space. It's trying to be a little more holistic of a platform that can sit between the users and the applications. And it can be used for a lot of things, CDN being but one of them. Fastly is absolutely in the CDN market and is competing against Akamai, Limelight, and others for all the video streaming features and content delivery features. Regardless of that, they both now end up in the slightly same space in that they're both competing around edge compute and building up a developer platform upon their edge network to utilize the distributed compute they've got on all the edge servers, but also expose that programmable network that goes between those endpoints. And that's what I'm most excited about with this space, is that it's a whole new computing paradigm that is going to compete with core cloud. It's at the beginning stages of that competition. And I guess want to caution slightly is that this is like the rise of IoT. It's a lot of proclamations about how successful this is going to be. But where's the money? Where's the solutions? It's taking time to adopt IoT. That's probably likely to be unlocked with 5G. And that is likely to unlock a lot more potential with edge networks. But the caution I gave with edge networks is when they're building developer platforms, it's up to each customer, each developer team of developers, to figure out how to best leverage edge networks as a compute location versus core cloud. So every company that starts adopting edge as a compute paradigm needs to make that decision about where that line lives, about what makes sense to deploy into the edge, what makes sense to keep in core cloud. And that's the one caution I have with this industry is that it's at the beginnings, and we need to see, companies need to figure out the ROI on this. What's clearly it looks like it's going to be cheaper to deploy compute in the edge, but it's less powerful compute. And you certainly aren't going to use it for any kind of centralized data store you've got, such as your data warehouse and where you're collecting your operational metrics and stuff. That's all going to remain in core cloud, including like heavier AI processes over that centralized data, where you're doing data mining or data science on top of your operational data. That's not moving to the edge. What is going to move to the edge is things that need better network control, where you need to change the routing of networking and apply logic, but also where you need to greatly reduce the latency of your application. You need to be as responsive as possible to whatever the device is. I think the really easy one that I can see is you could be running, I don't want, weaker is the wrong word, but less powerful. You could be running AI on that less powerful edge compute server. It can extend the AI capabilities of dumb devices. What I mean is that devices like smartphones that don't have much compute power could be offloading some kind of AI decision to the nearest edge, it could be making that decision there and sending it back. And so I feel like the power of edge networks is blurring the line between the endpoints themselves and that compute, and merging them together, because it's only one hop away. And it's, I think both companies are advertising it's 100 milliseconds or less from the majority of the internet populated globe to their nearest edge server. So you're going to see the lines blurring between the endpoints, which is any device out there in the wild, or IoT, or OT, which is operational technology control. I think smart factories. You hear the word OT. That line's going to be blurring. That's the exciting part with edge compute, with the hesitancy that every company needs to figure out what that line is. But I think this could help with AR, VR. Certainly is going to help with asset tracking your fleet of vehicles as they move around the globe. Airplane tracking, as an example, can all be pinging the nearest edge server, and you could be tracking things around the globe through that mesh of networking, rather than through some core cloud in Alexandria, Virginia. So that's
Awesome.
some of the excitement. I think that covers the similarities. The difference is that Fastly, going in with that mindset of we've got to be the fastest CDN, and I think they are, is the same mindset they took with the edge server. And so they wanted to architect it to be as fast as possible. It's taken time to do that. And, basically still not in production. It officially is production, but it's not generally available, which is what I consider production, meaning that people can actually use it. They just have a limited subset of customers using it. Whereas Cloudflare likes to kind of move fast, hopefully not break things, but move fast and iterate quickly. And they put out their faster V8 browser, 2+ years ago, now 3 years ago. So both of these companies kind of had the same idea at the same time about developer compute, but Cloudflare has been in production for several years, and they've just been iterating more and more, making it into a more fully featured developer environment over that time. And to my investment thesis, has been building other products on it that address markets like cybersecurity and stuff like that.
Perfect. That's a good segue into my next section. But wow, what you just said, there are so many things you just spoke to that I could hop on. But I'll come back to it later on. I think you already talked about some of the key industry trends to expect. And I'm going to come back to a few of those, maybe towards the end as we wrap up. But I really love the differentiating factor you mentioned there. Fastly's goal really is all about speed. And it's almost like they're really doubling down on the CDN space, and they're all about speed within the CDN as well as speed on edge servers as well, right? And maybe this is also one of the reasons why, and this is maybe you could clarify this for me. It almost looks like people talk about the fact that perhaps Cloudflare should be compared more to Zscaler, right? Just because in terms of how the whole network traffic security piece, and Fastly should be compared maybe more with Arkham and Lightlight. So do you want, let's maybe
Yes.
talk about security focus now. Let's talk about security in terms of technology differences between both. How would you approach that?
So I agree with your take just now that Fastly is mostly competing with Akamai, and Akamai is not standing still. They're a giant corporation that is the gorilla of the space, and they absolutely have a newly developed uh, edge compute platform, and are building these same sorts of things. But where Fastly is going to absolutely beat them is in the developer focus and the speed. And what I was hoping, and it hasn't come true, is I thought there would be maybe an innovation um, advantage, that they could be innovating quickly with their product. That's a slight bit of disappointment I've had with Fastly, is that they've just been building this product kind of in secret for several years, and it's still not on the market 3 years later. So, but I think they will, continue to beat Akamai based on that speed. They just built a product on top of their computed edge. That was a CDN focused product. And they were kind of crowing about how much they loved building it on their own network. And it's interesting to have these two companies side by side and see these differences in product cadence of how often they're releasing and innovating, and when they're both building the same thing. But absolutely, the divisions you drew in the industry, yes, Fastly is competing slightly against Cloudflare for sure on the developer ecosystem portion of edge networks, but it's also still competing against Limelight, against Akamai, because it really does want to handle like a lot of the media traffic, video streaming capabilities. That's really, I think, its focus with this edge compute platform for itself, is that it's going to continue to innovate in the CDN space. However, then they purchased Signal Sciences, and that was a great move on their part, to provide more application security, is the primary focus with Signal Sciences. And so that's providing, some of the capabilities that Cloudflare did. So it even goes beyond some of those capabilities with something like RASP, that is kind of a runtime, continual analytics in your application. So it's a library you put in your application. Cloudflare, on the other hand, had all those, had a core focus on application security. That then pivoted into network security, where they said they released a product. Well, let me start with application security. It's all about web application firewalls, which is again not something that Signal Sciences does well, and DDoS protection, which is, because they're a proxy between requests and your application, they can help filter out attacks when you get bombarded by a botnet and someone's making 1 million requests a minute to your web server in hopes of crashing your web server. Cloudflare can absorb that load for you and you don't see a thing. So that's called DDoS protection. And so Cloudflare started with application protection. It was all, again, developer focused. They have an enormous free tier of services that they allow, but it's also about, performance and reliability. And they've started to build more enterprise focused features. But I'd say they pivoted slightly. They started with application protection. They started to go into network protection when they released a product called Magic Transit, that basically is a way to put Cloudflare as the protector over your enterprise network. Like you hook up your headquarter network, and it would provide that same DDoS and firewall protection. And now they're pivoting by building applications on top of their workers' compute platform. They're pivoting into user security with Cloudflare for Teams, and now network security with their SASE products, SASE Networks products, that is allowing them to become the backbone of an enterprise network because of their edge network. That's where I get most excited about this company. And that's somewhere where Zscaler is operating in both of those things, the zero trust cybersecurity space, SASE network space, which is, using the cloud as your network backbone. That's the areas that Cloudflare is pivoting into. So it absolutely, so Cloudflare's a little bit against Fastly and Akamai and Limelight. It's definitely absolutely against Zscaler, Palo Alto, Netscope, a private company that's doing the zero trust and SASE network cybersecurity industries. And so it's got more competition. It's in more markets, and Fastly's not trying to enter that market. It's trying to protect applications. It's not getting into networking protection, user protection, at least not yet.
Right.
So that's maybe the key difference of where they're going with what they're building themselves upon their own edge network.
Yes, good point. Yes, and I think from the past conference call, you could actually get that difference in Fastly keeps actually, if you go through the shareholder letter as well as the conference call and the press release, they keep hammering on privacy, 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 right? And meanwhile, if you go on Cloudflare, this kind of similarities I noticed. Cloudflare is mostly about security, or well, more from the sense of security, more from like your DDoS protection or bot management. Bot management was a major word actually at the last conference call. So yeah, you could kind of see those core differences. So that's awesome. So I think we maybe have a good difference on that piece. I want us to just maybe move on to the next aspect. So the go-to-market strategy. So I think we've talked about some of the key differences across technology, more from the security perspective, as well as the architectural perspective, and as well as some of the key similarities. So the go-to-market strategy, I think this is probably where we have the biggest differences between both companies. So first of all, for GTM, could we first of all talk about more from the target audience as well as from the sales funnel, and maybe what you've learned, because I think I want us to maybe, and this is something I'm observing. I think everyone probably on this space knows, okay, Cloudflare is known to be for the small, medium-sized businesses. Fastly is more for the enterprise premium. Well, maybe let's take that a little bit step further and maybe what we've learned, because what I'm noticing from Cloudflare's past call is I have this feeling Cloudflare is almost wanting to move into the enterprise. Like you noticed on that call, there were lots of talk about new Fortune 500 clients. So I want us to maybe go beyond just what we already know, and how do you see this evolving for the go-to-market strategy?
Yeah. So I actually consider that a humongous misnomer. That Fastly is enterprise and Cloudflare is SMB. That's not actually true. Cloudflare has clients from single developer shops to hundreds of thousands of employees. So you take a company like Shopify, they're clients of both companies. Okay, Shopify is a client of Cloudflare. Shopify for the services that Cloudflare provides, but then for CDN in particular, it's also a customer of Fastly. And so it's it just somehow that kind of shorthand got stuck around the Twitter space, and it's not true that there is enterprise customers at Cloudflare. But as far as go-to-market, let's step back to let's consider Cloudflare before the past few quarters. So before it had its Teams product and really started going more after zero trust and SASE networks. So the go-to markets were very similar in that they were both bottoms up. They were both focused on developers and IT staff as the sign up. And so Fastly wanted big customers. It wants, kind of the Silicon Valley customers that are very future forward in terms of their development efforts. Companies like Shopify, Pinterest, and others. I want to say Ticketmaster was another one that was a big customer of theirs. It wants customers that are going to use it a lot. So that in turn, turned into that they have an enterprise focus. Not necessarily, they have other customers, but what they provide is kind of white glove treatment. They onboard customers and really like to kind of handhold them and make them understand the power of their platform, what benefits they're going to get. Here's how you're going to integrate it. And so, uh, unfortunately, I feel like that slows their customer growth down slightly, or not really knowing their internal operations that much, but customer growth hasn't been exploding the way I hoped when I look for companies that are land and expand, which is landing new customers and then expanding the usage they get from your platform. That's absolutely the case with Fastly, but they kind of forgot about the land a little bit and worried more about the expand. So they had all these customers, and they publish how much, the average contract value is going up and up and up, but their, customer growth is kind of where things have petered out of late. Luckily, rebounded this past quarter. I'll add the prior quarter, pretty atrocious customer growth. I think it went down to 1/3 of where the level was the prior 3 quarters. On the other hand, but so developer focus, they have a lot of APIs that need to get integrated. Certainly they have dashboards and stuff to use too, but you have to have a developer effort in order to use their platform. And so they like to take a lot of care with customers and onboard them properly. It's a very long-term vision of how, they're going to have success with their companies and their customers. But it's that white glove treatment is the thing to really understand about it. I think that's what got translated into that they're more enterprise friendly. Cloudflare, on the other hand, CDN is but one service you're signing up for. And yes, they're highly programmable. There's a lot of APIs you can integrate with, but there's other services you might be signing up for. So what they have is an incredibly generous free tier. Any website in the world can sign up and just get basic protection features for free. It can act as the intermediary between requests and your application, and you can get out of the box CDN protection and DDoS protection, which is a lot of protection. It's a very incredibly generous free tier. But what that provides is a sales funnel for them, for all these developers that are joining, then want the other additional features, which is, hey, we've got this private backbone you could be using for your traffic, and we can route requests to and from your website through our faster backbone and be circumventing problematic areas of the web. That's one feature, but they've got all these add-on features. So they have tiers, free tier, pro tier, business tier, enterprise tier, and each one provides more and more features depending on what your company's stance is and what you want out of the product. But it's that sales funnel that's from the free that's important to understand about Cloudflare. And so very wildly different go-to-markets is absolutely where these companies diverge. Now that there's more user protection and network protection, I think Cloudflare has made the decision that is not coming from bottom-up decisions. That's coming from higher up in the chain within an enterprise. And so they're changing their sales go-to-market strategy for that in particular. And they've kind of bundled all these features together across their platform, app protection, or all the app features, which is security, performance, reliability, all of the user protection, network protection features that they're adding, and then SASE network, Magic WAN stuff they just came out with. All that's getting bundled into a platform called Cloudflare One, and they're presenting that as a menu of options to companies. I think that's what's making them more attractive to enterprises, is that they can go in and have a very specific use case for what they want, and it could be available in that menu of options in the platform. That's where they're changing their go-to market, keeping the developer and free tier, absolutely. They're not shifting the existing go-to market. They're adding an additional, kind of customer funnel technique and going straight to the enterprises. And because of that, they've had to beef up their sales force. And I'm sure there's some reorganization internally about, going from bottoms up go-to market and adding in this other way of kind of more top down is I think the challenge for Cloudflare is that you got to find the balance between those things. And of course, I as an investor would like them to have a lot of success in the enterprise sales because those are more for the bottom line. But that's kind of the critical difference, I think, with go-to-market. It's not so easy to boil it down into one's big companies, the other's little companies. It's not that at all. There's a lot of nuance there about, white glove treatment versus a wider breadth of products in their platform. It's kind of the key difference.
Fascinating. I could so much. So I could actually hop on that, but obviously I'm being very cautious with time. But one piece, but I really love the fact that you mentioned the fact that Cloudflare kind of transitioning over, kind of going that top down, right? Going to the C-suite. And actually, I actually think because both companies have a high amount of cash, right? Over $1 billion right now on their cash. They're sitting on cash. And I actually believe this year, Cloudflare would spend, rather than maybe doing an M&A, they would be more focused on that sales pitch. I think that's really where I could see them really transitioning to, and then really selling out those integrated suites of products to larger, more Fortune 500 companies. So that's really fascinating. And you could almost see them wanting to encroach on a Fastly's kind of go-to-market strategy. One question I had here, and this has always been crazy, and I think all investors would notice this as anybody in the financial world. What would you say is the reason for Cloudflare's superior gross margin? So there's almost a 20-point difference between the gross margins for Cloudflare as well as Fastly, right? I think it's about 77% for Cloudflare, and for Fastly, it's about 55%, right? So if you touch on that, as well as from my understanding, this is my understanding is Cloudflare has, sorry, Fastly has this, they have a wider globe of networks across the world, right? They have a lot of infrastructure that they've actually made. Maybe this is maybe why they have a lot more how do I put it? More around maybe more global infrastructure around the world that makes them a lot more faster for their clients. And I think they spend a lot more on that as opposed to fast Cloudflare. So if you could maybe touch on the gross margins differentials and why those margins are pretty different for both companies.
Yeah, I pointed out the difference in gross margins when I first wrote up Cloudflare, and I did a comparison to Fastly and Cloudflare. And to be fair, I've been a shareholder of both, but I currently only own Cloudflare. Um, the When I pointed out the gross margin difference, the general response on Twitter was that Cloudflare has a generous free tier that may be not being accounted for in the gross margins, and that might attribute some of the difference, but I've never actually dug in that deeply. One thing I should note is that, and didn't talk about before with their go-to market, but it's their pricing and how they handle pricing. Fastly is a usage-based company. And so what it has is built more bandwidth and fewer edge servers. Whereas Cloudflare has less bandwidth than Fastly, but more edge servers. So the way they've distributed across the globe, both the underlying edge network and the edge servers is different, or different speeds of both networking and server power, compute power. But Fastly is at its core a usage-based company, which is why it kind of waxes and wanes on its growth rate, which doesn't bother me as an investor, knowing that it's usage-based. But what I want to see from usage-based company is gross margins going up. I want to see that the infrastructure that they've got to buy, that what I call the infrastructure tax that they have to pay to the underlying providers, that they have some kind of leverage within their architecture, and you should start seeing gross margins go up. That said, things get a lot more complicated, or just to talk about Cloudflare first, but I'll circle back to Fastly. Cloudflare, on the other hand, has a set pricing per tier. Now, there's certain things you can sign up for that have different pricing outside of those tiers, like add-ons. And then there's some slight usage-based contribution from their new Workers Unbound is usage-based pricing. But they've got this generous free tier. They've got these set pricing levels. And so they actually have a much steadier growth pattern So, they're onboarding a ton of customers. It's much slower for Fastly, but those customers are, spending more and more. The net retention's going up, but you're not going to see that variability in the top line because it's a subscription service. So you've got usage bases versus, SaaS subscription models are the pricing model differences. Where that gets a little bit more muddled with Fastly is that they have purchased Signal Sciences, which is a SaaS application. And so they've got to figure out how to integrate, their usage versus um, subscription within their financials. And I kind of think that's why the CFO is not there anymore. Is that there seemed to be a little bit of confusion on the conference call about that and how they were going to integrate it. And it said that they were going to allow users a choice, and I didn't quite get any of that, of how that difference would happen between usage-based and subscription. But all the Signal Science customers are on a subscription plan to protect their, for application protection features. And really, when they purchased Signal Sciences, they were moving a lot more towards kind of that full breadth of products, and became more of a performance and security focused for applications at that time. So there's some, a lot of nuance there in their pricing.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And yeah, and I think you could also see it in the dollar-based net retention, right? Fastly has a way higher dollar-based net retention as opposed to, well, I mean, Cloudflare has actually improved, actually. I think that actually did go up quite a bit quite recently.
It did, yeah, but you see those swings too. It's all usage based, so it's all about what's going on. March, I'm sure, was huge because of March Madness. There's way more traffic going on, video traffic or whatever through their edge network, and what's essentially their CDN product. And so, it waxes and wanes. You're going to have a lot of traffic in holidays for Christmas, but you're not going to have so much traffic. You're going to have lesser traffic maybe in summer when people are getting outside. So you get that waxing and waning of usage. There, I don't quite get the games that Fastly's playing with the net retention rate and net expansion rate, and that they have three metrics that they're doing. Again, it's something I guess that bothered me about the CFO. But what they focus on is customers spending more, and I think the metric to watch with them is that average customer spend has been steadily rising. I think it's over 800,000 now per customer. So, that's again how they get the moniker that they deal with enterprise customers. They have a lot of big customers that spend a lot of money, and that money is going up and up and up as those users use the platform more. My concern is they don't have enough focus on the land. They have all the focus on the expand. And so they are paying attention to that. They just hired a new CRO. And so and I think someone's paying attention in the organization. I don't think it's quick enough for the CRO to have contributed, but their customer growth shot up immensely this quarter. I don't know if it was just timing between quarters or what, but it's their highest customer growth as far as net adds in, I think, ever probably. So something's going right within Fastly of late. I think the problem the market has is with guidance and the CDN part of their business. It isn't growing as much, and the edge compute isn't contributing yet. Like just as far as the long-term timing of this business, caused the organic growth rates to plummet. Again, they made a fantastic acquisition with Signal Sciences, and it's contributing heavily to them, at least keeping numbers in a growth, giving them a high amount of growth at the top line for now.
Yes, yes, and I think a lot of the last conference call for Fastly was really focused around guidance and lots of confusion on what happens in the back half of this year. But I really love how you differentiated that, just how Fastly's usage-based use our product a lot more. They have a lot more maybe infrastructure tax that they have to pay, and maybe that's why their margins are slightly lower than kind of Cloudflare. But to wrap up, because we're kind of approaching time. Well, I mean, maybe we might have some time. But I just want to leave some time for Q&As at the very final end. But um, just to wrap things up, because we could have this conversation for another hour. I love this, but we gotta respect time. And I just wanted to end this with maybe a balance of what gets you excited as well as what makes you scared about the future. I mean, if you could kind of balance the reward and risk of CDNs, because one of the biggest pushback that many people go against Cloudflare and Fastly is, I mean, I think from our conversation today, we've kind of quashed the fact that CDNs are just commoditized, right? That's what people talk about these companies. And I think early on in our conversation, we've clarified the fact that there is a huge part of the edge networks and just the way Fastly and Cloudflare have actually built their platforms, they're really set up well to capitalize on the later trends in 5G and IoT. Another pushback a lot of people have beyond commoditized is the competition from the cloud providers, which I don't believe that's the case. Where I actually see the biggest risk, and maybe touch on this, could be um, Agora, Zoom, Swallow, and even Palantir recently they built their edge. Like some of these companies are actually building niches. They're building their own edge networks around the niches. And you might have a situation whereby if some of these companies get really good at building their own edge networks or just building a niche within those on the edge, they don't need to rely as much on Fastly and Cloudflare. And so maybe let's balance for your final words, balance the risk, what keeps you worried, as well as why you're excited from that. So
Well, I was certainly, I think, clear at the beginning of the excitement is that this is a new development paradigm for application developers and a whole new compute space that is a globally distributed network around the globe rather than a enormous pile of compute located in a set city. And so it's just pretty easy to see what a lot of the attraction is in globally dispersed applications and making that easier to deploy from the developer's standpoint. And so I think these new developer platforms will be successful. Um, and I don't think that the cloud services are going to be very quick to catch up to that. Um, in the case of Cloudflare, then it's expanding into a whole new markets in terms of cybersecurity and being the enterprise network backbone like Zscaler is. And so it's kind of going a different direction there, although I thought it was pretty interesting in the conference call when the CEO said that we don't really compete with niche edge platforms, that we compete with core cloud. I thought said it best in that these platforms that spin up, it goes back to that wild card of every customer has to figure out how it best fits in their development strategy and their development architecture. And so, there's absolutely risk there of how much it's used or underused as a development platform, which is, I guess, why I'm a little more excited about companies that are leveraging that edge network themselves into new directions. Um, but yeah, there's certainly risk that core cloud could start paying attention. I think there's some differentiating features. Certainly, cost is a lot more minimal, I think, and maybe a lot more transparent. And that's kind of why there's this focus for both Cloudflare and Fastly on developing a developer ecosystem around these things, which is making it easy to have visualization or observability into these platforms, to have a development environment where you could debug and test things and deploy into production. They're building all that. Um, And so, ultimately, I think these are going to be successful platforms. And there is other smaller developer platforms like Netlify and Vercel that are kind of going after that space, using edge networks as a development environment. But really, that's just one. you know, part of the potential, I guess, is what customers are going to do with these platforms, and that's the biggest wild card to me is what customers are going to do with this platform.
Yes. Great. Thank you so
Ultimately,
much.
if it's successful, let me just add one last thing. If
Yeah.
it's successful and you have usage-based pricing over it, like Fastly does, that could be a successful combination for sure. And so for, long-term vision with Fastly seems to be in the right place.
Yes. Maybe kind of goes back to what Snowflakes does with a premier, a similar kind of usage based portion, and maybe that's and how that has helped them be really successful. So, I mean, we could go further into this. We could expand more about this. But I know, Muji, you have a premium service, and maybe for people who are interested, people who have a lot more questions about this, would you mind just, and if you don't mind, talking a little bit about what your premium service is about, and maybe if people wanted to learn more about some of what we just talked about, and maybe even go deeper, what benefits would they even get with your premium service? So if you don't mind talking about that for a bit.
Yeah, sure, Francis. I think your mic changed or something there. You got really much farther away or something. Um, yeah, so I did make a premium service. Obviously, I like to think about these environments and technologies of data and analytics and developer tooling and edge networks and cybersecurity, zero trust, SASE networks. And so, yeah, I finally developed a development platform, or sorry, been talking developer platforms for an hour. Uh, Developed a premium service on my blog because my blog was just my hobby late at night after the kid went to bed, and hence the very sporadic pieces that I came out with. And so I decided to kind of leave a career in software development behind and see where I could go with the blog. So I do have a Premier service. It's just to kind of get the same insights you get from me. I'm not an advisory service in any way, shape, or form. I'm not giving buy and sell recommendations. I'm simply talking about the same companies I talk about publicly behind a paywall. And then to the benefit of the people who aren't Premier members, I'm going to be releasing a piece a month on the public blog. So please do sign up there if you're interested and don't want to pay. Absolutely join up to the free service because I'm going to be releasing once a month, and that's a faster cadence than I've had in the past. I never released even a piece a month. It was probably every other month in the past year. So yeah, just trying to uh, or I guess the way I'm phrasing my Premier service is it's like a close knit expert network where I'm just talking about the technologies and where companies could be expanding into adjacent industries, what decisions I like and don't, what I see in the financials that I like and don't, that support that. But it's really about expanding TAM, keeping the growth and profitability scaling upwards. That's what I'm interested in finding in these companies.
Perfect. And I think a lot of people would get that. In, could you hear me clearly now?
Yeah, much better
Okay.
now.
And I think that's the benefit. You get almost that insider analysis. Like you were speaking about Cloudflare before the pandemic, right? Before even anybody heard about them. And I think you were, yeah, you were a major part. So, and I think people would benefit from getting that insider analysis, much earlier, before people would do. So I highly encourage people to definitely check out Muji service as well as the free service as well, right? Because he does have a lot, like a lot of the conversation we did go through today about Cloudflare, about edge networks. There's actually quite a bit of really informative information as well. So I highly recommend people go there. This final piece, Muji, I don't know how many people you have to maybe to you might want to take for maybe just a maybe Q&A. I'll totally leave that discretionary for you. But thank you so much for this, and we'll open it up if you want.
We went a little long with the space, but I got a little bit of time left. I think unfortunately some people I had a bunch of people in the queue and most of them have dropped off. But I noticed from growth to value wanted to speak. I'd love to hear what he has to say, or if there's a question, and then I'll take a question from Maz.
Yeah, hi. You did a great presentation as I expected. Always great to hear you giving more details, giving more background. Just wanted to say something about the metrics, the different metrics in the Fastly report. Actually, I do like them because Fastly is one of the few that gives so much insight in the different metrics, and there's some confusion sometimes. So you have the dollar-based net retention and dollar-based net expansion rate. So the retention means you take all the people, all the customers of last year, and then you look how much those people have spent this year. Even the ones, you include churn there. So if you look at dollar-based net retention rate, Fastly had 107%, which is not that high, but that's completely understandable because of TikTok, of course. And then the dollar-based net expansion rate means that people, the clients, the customers that stay, how much more have they spent? And you see that Fastly had a dollar-based expansion rate of 142%. So that means that the customers that stayed on the platform spent 42% more than the year before. So, and I really like that because a lot of companies just give one of the two. And I think both give you some insight, and especially if for a company like Fastly in that transition from that huge customer TikTok that leaves, if you just see the net retention rate at 107%, you think it's awful. If you look at the dollar-based expansion rate, then you see 142% is really impressive. So I think those kind of insights are, and there was a third one as well. I don't remember that one by heart, but it made a lot of sense as well. So just wanted to add some color there, that the numbers are actually something I really like, and I hope that the new CFO will give the same insights. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I just circle back. I mean, it's great. It's great expansion.
Mm-hmm.
I just the disappointment for me is in the land.
Yeah, I agree there. I agree. I definitely agree there. I mean, and I really like the way you phrase that as well. Land and expand, and then indeed the land is atrocious.
Yeah.
And well, there the new CRO could could solve some of the problems. And if you looked at the new customers they added, it was much better than any of the last quarters, but still way to go there.
Yeah, that'll be actually the interesting part to watch. Do they keep that white glove service that I was mentioning? I assume so. That seems to be part of the culture of the company. But then they've got to figure a way to scale that better, as far as in general, improving whatever customer engagement process they've got.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a great move on getting a new CRO. That was one where the prior CRO left maybe a year ago, and the CEO said he was going to fill in that role. And while he was doing that, it kind of stagnated and then plummeted. So that was part of the disappointment I've had with them. But
yeah, I can understand that. And I think in general, I think everybody or the people are put in place now. I think Joshua Bixby is a good CEO. I think Arthur Bergman is at the place where he should be, Chief Architect
completely
Officer. I think he's one of the people in the world who knows most about the infrastructure of the internet. So he's at his place as well. And then now as a new CRO, let's hope that you know it really has to work, because otherwise the company will, well, you know, slowly be taken over by or you know, outcompeted by all the rest.
So thank you. I appreciate the commentary,
Yeah.
and glad,
Yeah.
glad someone who's maybe more of a bull than I was on Fastly could contribute.
Yeah,
But I've got to wrap up.
I see the problems. I don't deny them, not at all. And yeah, I mean, the land and expand, and the land is not there. I agree. I totally agree. But I also see, you know, that they're you know, they're pointing the ship in the right direction slowly, not fastly, but slowly. And yeah, I mean, still a great company. And as you know, they both Cloudflare and Fastly have actually the best architectural structure for edge computing. So that's the promising part.
That's it. I mean, you heard all the excitement I had if you were at the beginning of this call on edge networks. It's got a lot of potential, and you know, even the industry minders like Gartner have been talking about this for years. That the paradigm of the way data is going to transmit across the internet is shifting from centralized outward to the central, and even outward staying on the periphery within the edge itself and not even going into the central. You can have entire app stacks built upon the edge compute that aren't talking to centralized services. So it's absolutely exciting.
Well, I saw an estimate that 70% in 2027, and I always have to, you know, you always have to take those, you know, projections with a grain of salt, or, you know, more than a grain sometimes. But you know, the 2027, 70% of all the data would not leave the edge, and the 30% remaining on the core cloud, public cloud, would be even, you know, bigger than the 100% right now. I don't know if 2027, if those numbers, and that's because of the huge data explosion, of course. You know, you talked about it, the Internet of Things, and you know, autonomous cars, or whatever, what have you. I think a lot of these things will still be in their, you know, early phase, even in 2027. But I think the trend is clear.
Actually, you just mentioned autonomous driving. That's actually one I'm not sure that edge is going to benefit that much, because autonomous driving is likely to be driven by GPUs that are on the car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
now,
I know, but I think
that AI extension I was talking about before is probably not applicable to autonomous driving. But
yeah, but what I mean is probably you'll need the cars to talk to each other as well at a certain moment.
Yes,
and that's when the edge will come in.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, exactly that. You could be talking between a fleet of vehicles, of buildings, of whatever, and it could just entirely be handled in the edge network, not go to core cloud, and then be routing faster, more securely, and you know, ultimately we didn't even discuss it today, but there's a whole world of like compliance and legal regulations. In fact, there's a fantastic piece from Stratechery, Ben Thompson, on this week in terms of Cloudflare that I'd recommend anyone here read.
Oh yeah,
where he's talking about you know, data sovereignty, and law sovereignty, and you know, that's, I think, where edge networks have a pretty huge advantage over core cloud. So
absolutely,
there's a lot of other aspects we didn't even get into. But
well, it's
unfortunately,
you know,
I have to run in less than 5, so I just wanted to take 2 final questions. But I super appreciate the insights. Thanks for.
All right.
Hey.
So hey,
Muji. Hi. So one quick comment. I actually spent quite a lot of time looking through Cloudflare's documentation. And one thing that really stood out to me was the idea that there's only one region. And I think the fact that they can move data or servers around to basically wherever is the closest point between the two entities, I think is a game changer. It's something that, like, if you're an engineer, you have to constantly deal with today, and it's kind of a pain in the ass. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was durable objects. I think you mentioned that it's kind of like a paradigm shift I compare that to, going from SQL to NoSQL. One of the concerns I had, and maybe like you could kind of address it, was, that paradigm shift took like a long time, and the folks that actually like invented the technology weren't necessarily the ones to benefit from it the most. So do you feel like that's a risk? Second, as kind of more and more complicated use cases are onboarded into Cloudflare, do you feel like naturally developers will be looking for other features and functionality that are only available in core cloud? And now that'll kind of naturally gravitate them to say, well, I might as well just build it on AWS because this is not available on Cloudflare. Thank you.
Well, I think the reverse is true, that they're discovering what's in the edge. Like with Cloudflare, they built their workers system that's serverless platform, but then on top of it, they built Pages, which is about deployment of web applications. And so it's it's um, it's a environment that appeals to both back-end developers that are doing coding and data tracking and interconnecting APIs, and front-end developers that are writing web pages, and the graphic designers that are putting up imagery and stuff like that are all using the Pages element. So there is a developer ecosystem being developed in these platforms. And I actually expect Fastly to completely go the same route with front-end web applications and what's known as the Jamstack paradigm of deploying, which is using CDNs as a deployment engine for your web app. Fully expect them to go that route too. So absolutely expect developer ecosystems to continue to expand from here.
Sorry, just my first question was, do you think that given that this is like a paradigm shift, it will take developers like a very long time to like kind of change their mindset to build applications this new way? What is Cloudflare doing to help move that forward?
So luckily, there was already a mental shift to serverless, which is with the rise of AWS Lambda, you had a new paradigm where I could be writing applications as individual functions. So instead of this monolithic API that handles all my e-commerce calls about adding things from carts and changing inventory and sending a bill and making sure the payment got in, there's lots of individual actions just in the simple e-commerce application. Each of those can be broken down into separate functions. And so there was already this kind of mental shift to in the developer world, where we've moved from monolithic apps running on powerful servers that we put in our own data centers. That moved to the cloud. Then we had containers, which you could bundle your application stacks in a much more clean way that was replicable, and you didn't have to worry about the operating system or the infrastructure it ran upon. Was the next shift, and that's kind of the rise of Docker and Kubernetes. And then from there, you've got the rise of microservices, where you start breaking your application down into these individual functions. And then from there, you have the serverless shift, which was breaking that, having those functions hosted in a serverless environment like AWS Lambda. So edge compute is all about serverless. So you're writing applications in WebAssembly and compiling them, but then you don't care where the infrastructure is. And I find it funny that Cloudflare, when you deploy into region Earth. You're deploying to the entire globe, and your application runs on every single edge server in their network, which is 200 plus edge servers. And I assume, we don't have that vision into Fastly's computed edge, but assume the same there, that you'll deploy it and it'll go into all 80 plus edge servers. So it is a paradigm shift, and that's kind of why I got into the hesitation at the beginning of where every company, every group of developers and every company has to figure out that balance of what should go where between these two environments. But just the fact that Pages exists shows you the potential here that web apps, you don't have to maintain a web server. It could deploy directly to the edge in Cloudflare Pages. That's huge. And so it's extremely appealing to not have to worry about infrastructure as a developer. And so, as these companies figure that out, I think we're going to see this become a potent system, much less all the other benefits it gets with regional compliance with speed and reducing latency, and there's a whole host of improvements or reasons why you might shift to edge from core, and cost being one of them. And so that's the part that needs to get figured out. And I hope these companies, Cloudflare and Fastly, figure out how to sell that aspect to companies that are interested in edge. Prove the ROI. Have marketing materials that show how they can directly benefit from the edge, instead of just building this environment space and making the customers figure out how to take advantage. I hope that they have, and certainly I know Fastly's done this and Cloudflare, is that they have like kind of examples of what you could do with these things. Like it's the ticket master paradigm of where everyone wants to sign up for a ticket at once, and you've got to queue the incoming requests. That was a huge use case that both companies have kind of focused on. In fact, Cloudflare put out a product for signing up for COVID vaccinations that does just that. Like as soon as a website releases spots and everyone clamors to go fill those spots, it crashes the web server. And so they built a queuing system on top of it on their edge network. That's just but one example of something someone like Ticketmaster could use that to handle the incoming traffic and queue it up to their web server or whatever the underlying service is that's distributing tickets. And then ultimately that entire system could be built in the web itself. So companies have to figure out what that distinction is between these development environments. And then I think it's gonna be a migration. I think it's gonna be slow. They're going to figure this out over time, that what works best and where we should deploy what, how these things interwork, how we have vision over the top of it. Companies need to solve that.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I unfortunately am completely out of time. I was going to take one from O&G, but I've got to run. I'll hand it back to you, Francis.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, thank you so much for your time, Muji. I really hope at the end of the spaces, everyone has at least a good understanding of what are the key similarities between as well as Fastly as well as Cloudflare, as well as you've probably learned a couple of differences, slight nuance and slight differences between both platforms. I think Muji would be available on Twitter or on his premium service, which I encourage you guys to check out for more information. And I'm going to release my article over the next coming weeks. So my goal would be to summarize some of our conversations today on that article. But with that, thank you so much, Muji. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and just thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you guys. And thanks, Wolf, for your recording and all you're doing behind the scenes. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no problem with that. And just wants everyone to know that this was recorded by Josh Meltzer. We'll try to have that recording up within 48 hours like we usually do. We've been getting a little bit faster. If you check my pinned tweet, you'll see my Spotify and my YouTube, and I upload it to both. And I will also be having a space in an hour and a half from now with just investors. So if you're one of the people in here and want to hop on and talk about what you traded this week, feel free to do that as well. So thank you, Muji, for all of the incredible information. And his pin service is also, or his premium service is also pinned to the top of this call right now if you see the tweet there.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Francis, for putting it together.
Have a good weekend.